2 days later in the hotel, I saw the thing again, peripherally, but it had gone down to about 3 feet high, same shape exactly, this inverted cone. It was as if he'd come to say, I am real, I want to track, I want to keep tracks on you, I want to know. And then, because it was such a long distance from the hotel to the tomb of Calixtus, the catacomb of Calixtus, it was as if in using his power to travel the distance, he'd shrunk. Whereas, and the only thing I was talking to some friends who were expert on the costumes of the early church leaders, and apparently they had had something similar to that in black in some of the 1st and 2nd century church priests. And because as a priest I conduct a tremendous number of funerals, I've got 3 lined up when we get home on Tuesday, and because that's the sort of the major part of my church work is helping the bereaved. I'll digress on that for a second. So that's what got me into the church in the first place. When I was headmaster of Glendarrow High School in Cardiff, which was the Ely end of Cardiff, there was a lovely young fella, 16-year-old. He was the same age, pretty well as our 2 daughters, so we felt very, very sympathetic to his parents, having got 2 teenage kids of our own, who we thought the world of, and still do. And this poor lad had gone to help his brother in his food warehouse, was riding on top of a forklift, and the driver forgot there was a man on the top of the forklift. And he went under a doorway. And Peter was killed outright. And it nothing whatever to do with me or the school. You feel your students are your friends. And again, as we had 2 teenage kids of our own, I wanted to go around and see the parents, and I spent a couple of hours with his bereaved parents. And as I was coming, we're just sharing my very simple, coming back to your point about religion here, my simple, what was then a layman's faith that there is another world, and that they would see their son again. And as I was coming away, Peter's, the dead boy's sister, came to the door with me and said, "Headmaster, thank you for what you've said to my mother. She's calmer now. She's been in shock since the accident, and she's now coming back to herself because of your faith in the world to come." And I thought, well, if I've been able to help a bereaved parent who's just lost a lovely teenage boy, then this is probably the most important thing I've done in my entire life, if he could just take some of that pain away for her. And I thought, well, if I trained for the priesthood, I would be able maybe to help other bereaved families when they were in most need, which was what really, it was Peter's death that was my first push in the direction of training for the priesthood. And I've always only been a part-time priest. I do my church work, sort of voluntarily, and do other things to pay the bills. And it was, I said that sort of, and I wondered, because I still conduct maybe more funerals than anything else, that it was that, trying to help that bereaved family, that it sort of put it. You'll find some priests who are keen footballers who run the youth club. Another one's a brilliant musician. He helps to run the choir. Another one is a superb preacher. And I seem to be on that. I'll get phone calls from people who say, "Can you come and look after us?" With, in fact, very sadly, with our beloved Terry. He called me in a few years ago when his dad was terminally ill, and asked if I'd go over and see David, his dad was, and would I go and meet David and talk to him before he passed over, and then do the service for him. And did, and his mum a few years later. We were there this year when Lynn lost her mum, and went over to Salisbury to do that one for them. And sometimes it seems to me that there are certain church workers who seem to be in particular fields. But coming back to the thing in the catacombs, I couldn't help wondering whether he, especially after what these costume experts had been telling us, whether he had been a priest who had worked in 1st or 2nd century in that catacomb and had been a sort of bereavement priest who had been helping people there, and that whether he sort of felt that across the centuries here was another priest who also was in that particular area of the church. Now, that brings me to, we talked about that as a real mystery, the one you thought of, and about the strange thing in the hood. The other, I was saying, of maybe in my whole 77 years, there's been two, which is a fair average. Of these first-hand experiences, we've investigated hundreds, if not thousands, of unsolved mysteries. But this, when you actually get involved with it at first hand, and I had a very, very great pal called Billy Farrow. We used to teach together at Gamlingay Village College in Cambridge, in one of the 12 village colleges. And Bill and I were like brothers. He was a sort of honorary uncle to our kids, and we were honorary aunt and uncle to his kids, and it was that sort of relationship. He was a great bloke. And after we'd gone to live in Cardiff, and years after Bill and I worked together, he phoned me up and said that he'd been diagnosed with something terminal, and would I go and see him while he was still here. Of course, we raced over as often as we could to Cambridge to see him. And then I got a phone call from his village priest, Father Ian, who said, "Lionel, I'm ever so sorry, but your pal has just passed over, and one of his last requests was, would you come over to my church and we'll do his funeral together?" And I said, "Well, of course I will. I'll do anything for Bill." And I drove over, done a day's work in Cardiff first, drove over to Cambridge, having arranged with Father Ian that I'd stay overnight in the rectory and we'd do the service first thing on the following day. And as I got prayer books open, and you can imagine two priests planning a service together. You read that bit? Yeah, fine, I'll do that bit then. And will you do the next piece? And I'll do the next prayer. And suddenly, I saw Billy. He was as real as any of us sitting around the table. There's nothing filmy or spooky or odd-looking about. Just there, as he had been when we'd first been friends 30-odd years before. So instead of a sick man in his 70s, he looked 30 again, and eyes were shining, radiantly happy, and gave me, Ian could neither see nor hear him, but he was as real to me as any one of us around the table. And he said, with a twinkle in his eye and his characteristic sense of humour, "Tell Ian, Lady Juliana of Norwich was absolutely right." And then he went. And I thought, I've only just met Father Ian. Now, if that was Billy, he is asking me to tell a priest I've only just met that I've seen a ghost, and the ghost said, "I've got a message for you." And he'll think I'm coming off the wall. And then I thought, no, damn it, Bill and I would have done anything for each other. And if I'd been the bloke who'd passed over and come back to see Bill, he would definitely have told Ian. So, right. So I took a deep breath and said, "Ian, I know this is going to sound incredibly strange, but I've just seen Billy." And I said, he looked radiantly happy, he looked 30 years younger, he looked as solid as you and I, he didn't look spooky at all, and he gave me a message for you. So of course Ian is now looking expectantly to see what the message is, and I said, "He told me to tell you Lady Juliana of Norwich was absolutely right." Now, I'd expected, at best, a little shrug of the shoulders and no idea what that means, mate. He didn't. He moved back as if he'd been hit with a water cannon and said in an almost stage Boris Karloff type whisper, "You can't have known that." So of course now I'm all like, what can't I have known? Wow, what's the mystery? And